Hey guys, and welcome to the Lunge Lift podcast. Today we are carrying on from last week's episode of programming principles, and we're going to dive a little deeper into programming for sport versus health and aesthetics, and maybe some of the principles that we want to pull from each one so that you can make sure your training is effective and purposeful. So, Ash, I guess let's start when you say it's not just about the programming overall, but your general approach to training for these specific goals. So where should we dive in?
Sure. So I think the distinctions we're going to draw between health, performance, and aesthetics, so sports performance in that context, don't just apply to programming, but in the more general sense. But we'll try to keep it on that programming theme that we're working with at the moment. And the place I wanted to start today was picking up on something we touched on briefly in the last podcast, which is the concept of minimum effective dose versus maximal recoverable volume. So these are basically, if you didn't catch the last podcast, definitely go check it out now. But these are basically the two ends of the spectrum where minimum effective dose is what's the bare minimum to get a stimulus to improve your fitness in the way that you want to. And maximum recoverable volume is how much can you train before you actually start negatively impacting your fitness. That's like what you classically describe as overtraining. And the area between those 2 points we talk about as the sweet spot, where you are stimulating improvements in fitness, but you're not overdoing it. And the key thing we're going to keep coming back to in this podcast is where in that sweet spot do you want to be? Because I think we all acknowledge the fact that we want to be stimulating an improvement in fitness, whatever we are, whether we're just in it for health or we're in it for aesthetics or we're an elite athlete trying to improve our performance. But within that sweet spot range, the exact level of your training stress will be determined by what your goals are. So if you're an athlete, you want to be higher up the spectrum. If you're in it for health, lower down the spectrum. And we'll go into a little bit more depth on exactly the considerations for pitching your training at the right level.
Yeah, I guess it's quite tricky to pitch your exact point when you say lift as an example. So when you resistance train, because there's obviously it's a slightly different. It's not necessarily a cardio output. So, it's quite easy to measure those cardio levels because, we have a bit more data based on those. So the more data we have, the more precise we can be with understanding that stress, which is why, when it comes to cycling, there we have the training stress score, which basically all your workouts over the week, say, accumulates to, say, for instance, 350 training stress score points as an example over 3 sessions. So you might have one intense session at, say, 150 to, say, 175. And then you have 2 other, say, recovery style-esque ones, say about 75 each as an example. Yeah. So you're at the end of the week, just like we talk about a lot of the time, is all about that cumulative volume. So by the end of the week, we've lifted a certain amount of weight or we've cycled an amount of watts. And so we're utilizing that. Now, I guess when it comes to lifting, it's, as we know, as I just mentioned there, it's about the accumulated weight you've lifted throughout the week. But I guess that can get kind of hard to monitor when you're then doing, especially your accessory lifts and Metcons. Even though Metcons you can, but you're trying to be efficient. So you're trying not to have that load necessarily going through the body. So the lines start getting a little bit blurred there, don't they?
Exactly. I think it's a really important point, and something we talk about a lot at Red Pill is the difficulty in measuring training stress when it's mixed modal, because like you say, for those of you who haven't heard of training stress scores before, it's basically you get 1 point for 1 minute at your FTP, so your threshold power, and if you're at your threshold, you're working very hard, and if you're working 50% of your threshold, then you get half a point per minute, and it basically provides a really objective measurement for how taxing that session was, because obviously the longer it is, the more stress you accumulate, but also the more intense it is, the more stress you accumulate. And it's a very nice metric for understanding your total training stress in any time period. But when you start looking at lifting weights, you can do reps times weight as a measurement of your training stress score, but it is just a little bit less precise because it doesn't necessarily factor in the relative percentage of effort as easily or as clearly as it does on a training stress score. And have you still got your phone there, mate? Just before the call, we were looking at Rob's data on the Garmin Connect app, which is phenomenal and basically provides this graph. So if you're not on YouTube, I've actually got a blog on functionalmovementhacks.com which highlights this beautifully. But essentially the graph shows you your training stress score in a green band. So over the week, you can see the green band is the sweet spot that we've just been talking about, and you want your training stress to be in that sweet spot. And as you get fitter, as you can see towards the end of Rob's graph here, there's a little bump where he gets fitter, and that means the sweet spot is now higher. So he has to train more or more intensely to continue to get fitter. And Garmin just does a really great job of visualizing that, so you can see the effectiveness of your training. And if your fitness is going up, you need to train more, and you can train more, which is a key principle across all of these goals, like whether it's for health, performance or aesthetics. The fitter you are, obviously your baseline is then higher. So to stimulate further fitness gains, you have to train more than somebody who is less fit. It's a good business case for staying unfit. But equally, you are able to train and recover from more because you have that improved work capacity from the fitness you've gained.
Yeah, and I guess this kind of, in some respect, it kind of says the reason why individual programming is so important. Because, like, as an example, so me and one of the other coaches, and I say the Beyond the Saddle stuff that I'm doing, is we are both following the same program. So low volume trainer road base phase, right? So we're both doing the same workouts, but he's like 2 weeks behind me. Okay. Now he's training stress score that he can manage of the week. So on Garmin is up to 2.2 thousand, right? Yeah. So my stress score, the highest peak that I should be is like 700. Okay, so that's obviously takes into a lot of consideration, say lifestyle factors and stuff, and recovery, and as we mentioned there about like the maximum recoverable volume. And because I was doing the 3 sessions, and I was like, okay, I'm doing a little bit extra, like some lifting and stuff, but I'm feeling a little bit gassed. I'm like, do you know what? This is just enough. And then you've got Dan, who's like doing those 3 sessions, a couple of races, and I'm like, how is he doing that much? And it's just like, and it just shows the stresses of life, and our lives are so different that my body can only handle that if I want to improve. Yeah. Whereas Dan will be able to take his fitness that much further because he's able to, say, recover from that intensity that bit more. And why I'm saying this is because it's originally, like we say, try not to compare yourself to others and so forth, but we naturally do. You look at others that are, say, doing similar things and stuff, and kind of see what else is going on, to see where you can maybe improve or do more or do less or whatever. So you learn from that. Now, if I just took that as a thing of, I'm just going to do exactly what he's doing, and then it's going to absolutely throw me into the floor, I'm going to be battered, I'm not going to be able to recover, and then I'll probably really get demotivated from what I'm doing, even though what they planned for me originally was what I should be doing. And so it's why I gone to this tangent is because it's like, you need to learn where your sweet spot is and stay in your own lane, but still push those thresholds so that you can improve. Because seeing what other people are doing and trying to emulate that can normally lead in disaster.
Exactly. And I think you make a really good point there on maximal recoverable volume, in that it's not only your fitness that dictates your maximal recoverable volume, but also your lifestyle as well, where if you are able to live a less stressed life and you have more time to focus on your recovery and nutrition and sleep, you are able to recover from more training. So it's not just get fitter, train more, it's actually recover harder and you can train more, which is like all the stuff that gets loads of press for professional athletes working on their recovery game. It's because that allows them to recover from more training, which means they can get better faster, which is the next point I wanted to make.
Exactly. Exactly. And to keep it just on that, and it's where, so using Dan as an example, so my FTP, so my threshold is higher than Dan, so I am heavier than him by nearly say 15 kilos, so it should be, but so like I'm better at sustaining my sweet spot, like just holding that power at a higher heart rate and just sustaining it. So he's better at say climbing, and so we have different attributes there, right? Now what I found really interesting is that even though like, so my work output is higher, I can do it for a lot less, which when you put me into like the my lifting style and everything, it all really acute, like it really does show that we have certain attributes that can really benefit. But yeah, I get like people take the mick about when I try to go to bed early and stuff, but it's because it's what I need to do, otherwise I can't recover and push as hard as I can. It's just, but that's why other people can stay up till say 10, 11 o'clock and be completely fine, because the other stresses throughout their day maybe are not as high. So so leading into your next point, sorry.
So the next point was the more you train, the faster you get fitter. And I think it's more is more, as we've said before, and as we like to say at Red Pill, that if you are doing more, provided you don't exceed your maximal recoverable volume, you will get fitter faster. It's just the question of how long can you sustain that trajectory. Like if you are ramping stuff up very suddenly, it's unlikely your body's adaptation speed is likely to catch up with your training volume increase, depending how steep it is, obviously. So having an idea in mind of what your risk appetite is will dictate and how quickly you expect to get fitter. And I actually had a conversation with a mate last week who's had a bit of a sloppy end to the year last year, shall we say, and didn't train much or at all. And then he had this classic January's New Year's resolution, and then kicked off with like 100 kilometers of running and training every single day. And his fitness went up, but his body just couldn't adapt. So he started getting a knee niggle that he'd never had before. And the first thing I ask for anybody who's coming in with an injury is just like, what's happened in your training recently? And he's like, I went from literally 0 to 100. And it's like, okay, well,
classic, what we all do.
Exactly. This is expected. Like your body is going to complain when you hit it with such a sudden increase in training stress. And going more slowly, you have much more chance of actually adapting to that training stress rather than it being a massive system shock and causing something to flare up. So I think let's move into the actual areas and themes that we're going to look at. If we're working on health, obviously we want to be in the sweet spot, but we want to be towards the bottom end of the sweet spot. We basically want to get a stimulus and then get out. So it actually doesn't take a huge amount of training or intensity to improve our fitness to some extent. And that's all we need to maintain good health. Like we need to, like I said before the call, I hate the government guidelines as a rule or advice for most things health and fitness, but they have some truth in this area, in that you need to be doing a certain, I think it's like 150 minutes of vigorous exercise, which is just basically slightly breathless. So if you go for a brisk walk, that's sort of a rough rule of thumb of what you should be looking to do a week. 2 resistance training sessions a week, like where you're actually taxing your muscles to some extent and loading your bones to keep your bones nice and dense, is essentially like a tick box exercise. Have I covered all these bases to keep my heart and lungs in good condition, to keep my muscles and joints in good condition? If so, then I'm healthy, and I will, as long as I'm in that minimum effective dose area, I'm continuing to slowly improve and can, push off aging without adding a huge amount of wear and tear to my body. That is looking after your health from a training stress point of view. And the other thing I want to say from a programming point of view, if you're looking after your health, you just want to cover off all the main fundamental movement patterns. So your training program should cover a squat, a hinge, a push, a pull, and some form of rotation. If you're looking after those movement patterns for day-to-day life and general health, you're pretty well covered if those movement patterns are covered up.
And try and carry as well.
Carry, yeah.
I like carrying. So, I think health is, because it gets mistaken, I think, a lot of the time when it comes to, like, say, sports performance in a way. So there's that blurred line, like, people's perception of what health is probably an athlete, like healthy, and like under the hood, they're probably not actually, as we'll go into a little bit, but they're probably not actually that healthy. Because they've pushed their body to an extreme. And it's, as you say, understanding what health is for you, making sure you have those tick boxes of, okay, the government say this, but maybe I'm a little bit fitter than, say, the average person. So my health base markers are this, 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 and this, and you can go like through that. And it's making it a simple process to follow. Exactly. And that's what programming is in general. If you have something to follow, it takes one less thing to think about, which is just like when people are eating and so forth, and they struggle to, say, eat intuitively, for instance, that when they have a plan, they eat and they're completely fine. As soon as they stop following the plan, they're like, what do I do? And it's like, this is where, education and so forth comes in. And also then making sure you have certain constraints in life to make sure you don't go too far on either way.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think that too far in either way is minimum effective dose and maximal recoverable volume, right? Exactly. And that's why I think having that concept at the back of your mind makes things simple. And for the health, like a good example I just thought of is my mum. I basically ask her to record the number of squats she does every day. So as long as she's doing more squats, it could be 100 instead of 80 or 100 instead of 90 one day. She is improving steadily day to day. So her body is able to do more. And that's enough to maintain like muscle strength and, get a little bit of load through the body. So it doesn't need to be complicated, but just having an aware of what your baseline is to be improving. And as long as you are steadily improving, then that is all that's required from a health perspective.
Nice. So I guess that then leads into the sports performance side of things. And when I said how the line gets blurred, because we have this idea that athletes are fit, and they probably are. They are incredibly fit. They're incredibly like mobile, probably. They're everything that you think that what fitness is. But why might they not be?
Well, I think the key distinction is that they are fit, but they might not be healthy. So their metric that they're prioritizing and optimizing for is their performance, so their output, their athletic capacity. And like we said in one of our very early podcasts, to optimize for any one area, you've got to accept and compromise and sacrifice in the other two. And if all you care about is producing the fastest possible time or lifting the heaviest possible weights, then other things have got to fall by the wayside to some extent. And the other thing, and the key point, I think, for programming sports performance and training for sports performance is that it's competitive. If you're competitive against other people, it's not good enough to just be breaching minimum effective dose and slowly improving over time. Because if you're improving a little bit every day and somebody else is improving a lot every day, you're never going to beat them. And this is where you almost have to surrender to external circumstances to a certain point of view. You've got to do the best you possibly can and get better at the fastest possible rates, in the hope that your rate exceeds your competition's, so you can climb places on the leaderboard. Because at the end of the day, if somebody's already better than you and they're continuing to get better faster than you, you can never catch them. So you have to take a chance in trying to push yourself to improve at such a rate that you improve faster than them and make up that difference in output.
I guess that's that. You have to then weigh up, is the juice worth the squeeze, isn't it? It's like, that's the thing. It's like, is it worth taking the risk of ending yourself and not being able to recover, and then actually maybe taking a few steps back, but then understanding that was a lesson, and not just foolishly doing more, and then I can't do anymore now. And it's again bringing it back to programming. It's in that you can then look back at that data and say, right, okay, I crashed here. So this was this is me now kind of like asking you things. So like yesterday, I did some running intervals. I did 6 by 1,000. It was work 2, so like work to rest. Basically, I halved the amount of time it took me to do the run, right? So what I did was I dropped 10 seconds off each interval. So to get faster and faster and faster, right? So I knew I was going to do 2 recovery intervals at my first pace. That was like my goal. So what I didn't know I was only going to do 6. I might have done 5. I might have done 8, but I wanted to keep knocking 10 seconds off until I couldn't run any more better, right? And see what was happening to my body along that journey. Now, I found that when I got to 4 minutes 10 for a kilometer, that was where I couldn't control my breathing, and I felt my hips go to shit and everything. And that was where I felt I was able to do it, I knew I wouldn't be able to do another. I wouldn't be able to drop down to 4 minutes, because then it's not repeatable. So that was me trying to find my threshold. So like cycling. So I've now found around 4 minutes 10 is like probably my 110, 115%, say. So 2 intervals back from that would probably be around the right spot for me to try and maintain and hold. So about 4:30, which I did feel comfortable at. So now, in this respect, why I'm asking you here is that, is that right? Does that sound about right?
Yeah. So yeah, I think how this relates to sports performance point of view is we're trying to get an output metric for your running performance, right? So if we bring it back to the principle of training stress, we've got 6 intervals at around, like, I don't know what the average is, but say the average is 4:30 per kilometer. You've got 6 kilometers at that speed. So that's a really clear piece of information to say on that day, you are able to perform at this level. With the training that you're doing, we can look at your overall training load, and you should repeat that session. And if you're getting fitter, that means you're above minimum effective dose. So the training you're doing is effective. If you're not getting fitter, then we've got to ask, why are you not getting fitter? Why can you only hold 4:40 average for 6 kilometers intervals with the same rest? And that could be for several reasons. It could be that you're not recovering well enough because there's other stresses in your life. You're not getting the right food or sleep. It could be that the training you're doing is not effective enough, or it could be that you're not doing enough training. You could be doing great training, but actually the total volume just isn't enough. So those are the levers that you can pull to try and get your training back on track. But it's very, very relevant from a sports performance point of view that you know you're getting fitter, because if you're not, then something needs to change to get you back on track, because at the end of the day, that is what it's all about. If you're a competitive athlete, is your end performance. And if you're going backwards, you're getting the opposite out of your program compared to what you want. Exactly. So one of the main reasons why I brought that up is because I am not a professional athlete, and it's but I have sport performance say goals, and I know a lot of our listeners will do in whatever level they are. And it's one of the most important bits is having measurable metrics, and because without that, it's just it gives you nowhere to base everything off. So again, when it comes to your recovery, when it comes to how hard to push, if you're just going in this, when like with CrossFit originally, that thing of just go in, work as hard as you can for the day. And why that, even though that is like the bare bones of what CrossFit was, and it's what built the culture and stuff, it's like they realize if you want to get better, and which is why the athletes now are so much better, because the science got involved. It was more than just work. And now, right, cool, how much can we push and challenge you and manage your everything along the way so that you can get better. So no matter what level you're at, even if you're just like a park run, weekend run, and just that thing, your metric is probably your time that you get. Yeah. So then that you can then go, cool, okay, this is how I know I'm getting fitter. Am I doing anything in between? If I'm not, and all I do is my 1 park run a week, if you're maintaining that, then sweet, you're at your sweet spot of just being able to maintain your level of fitness. And when you start getting slower, then okay, cool, I'm going to need to do something else as well to help keep that maintenance. Exactly. But I wanted to bring that up because for me is I don't have a running metric at the moment. So I don't have anything. I have a 5K run, say as an example, but even that's just like a run, if you know what I mean. That was just like, you can average that out, but is that really my average pace? Probably not. Whereas like yesterday doing that was an interesting insight to me to see how the breathing got affected. And so I'm trying to find data now so that I can adjust my training stress with running. Yeah, spot on. And I think that's a super important principle for sports performance training, is that you have to have some metrics that you keep revisiting, some cornerstone sessions that you check in on every now and again to say, is this training working? Am I getting fitter? And that can apply to a session. So it could be doing 6 1 minute 1 kilometer runs with the same fixed rest, and is that performance going up? It could be a cornerstone session for like a 5x5 strength session. Am I able to lift more weight on the bar for the same amount of reps? There just needs to be a fixed check-in to test the efficacy of your training program, because unless you're comparing apples with apples, you are just guessing. So a lot of like, this is like criticism you have for CrossFit. If you're always doing random varied stuff, you never can be sure that your fitness is getting better. There has to be a constant. And this is why the benchmark workouts are a thing. If you do Fran every 3, 6, 12 months, you can compare whether that element of your fitness has got better. And you have to have that if you care about your performance. Otherwise, you are literally just guessing.
Yeah. And so thinking about then aesthetics, is it, do you really need to have those markers so much for programming? Like, is there that need, or, let's go with that.
Yeah, I think from a performance point of view, no. Like, if your goals are aesthetic, the metrics should be aesthetic as well. So it could be body fat measurements, could be weight on the scales is obviously a slightly more tangential marker of how good you look. Could be lean muscle mass if you've got an in-body or a body tracks scanner. But whatever you're trying to work on, the same principle applies. You have to be tracking it regularly to make sure you're on path. The simplest one is literally just the old mirror selfie in repeatable lighting, so you can see, is your body changing in the direction you want it to? And if not, then you need to adjust your training. Either it's not effective enough, it's not enough, or the nutrition and stress side of the equation doesn't balance out.
Yeah, and I guess then the respect in when you're trying to think about programming is in, it's not necessarily about the movements per se, program, but then you have to program out your weight loss essentially. So you're now going to say put it into a mesocycle and that. So we're going to say, cool, over the next 12 weeks, and we're going to break that up into chunks and stuff. You might have 3 weeks of a dieting phase, 1 week of a maintenance phase, like when we've had Liam on the podcast before. He's mentioned about cycling the calories around like that, especially if you're trying to gain. With weight loss, if you're in it for a long duration, you're looking for a more fat dominant loss rather than just weight loss in general. You know, understanding that the longer the journey, the more consistent that fat loss is going to stay off, rather than just bang. Okay, I know. It's like just gaming the system. Like when you're like squatting. Okay, cool. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to put a belt, knee sleeves, squat suit. I can squat all the weight thing. You just game the system. You're not that person. So we've mentioned in previous podcasts where, we want to become the person that weighs, like with me, I want to be the person that weighs 92 kilos. I don't want to just get to 92 kilos.
Exactly. So, that slow and sustainable point is key. I think everyone knows that faddy crash diets work and don't work, in that you can get a result quite quickly, but everyone knows that it doesn't last, and people usually rebound to a worse position than they started in before the crash diet. And we spoke about it on the podcast, I think, with Liam, where the body has the concept of a set point. It likes homeostasis. It likes to maintain the way things are, and it will try to keep you that way within certain boundaries. And with a body composition goal, you're trying to change that set point. So you're not trying to just get lean for a flash moment in time, unless you're a competitive bodybuilder, obviously. But you are trying to now reset your set point to, like you say, you want to reset your set point to, say, 92 kilos. If you do that, if you get to 92 kilos very suddenly, your body still thinks you're a 100 kilo man. So as soon as it gets the opportunity, it's going to bring you back there. Whereas if you've slowly and steadily reduced your body weight and your body's got used to being that body weight, that becomes your new set point, and its instincts are to keep you at 92 rather than around. And it's the thing that nobody likes to hear, but slow and steady does win the race. So for any long-lasting, meaningful body composition changes, actually the slower the better. The longer it takes you to get there, the longer it's probably going to last, provided that you're always moving in the right direction. And it's unfortunate because a lot of people in the fitness industry sell quick fixes, and they sell 4-week lean and ripped and stripped and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it doesn't work.
No, and as you say, it's funny because I'm reading Chloe Aesop's fables at the moment, so it's like just going through a lot of those stories, and it's the one of them I just read was obviously the tortoise and the hare.
Yeah,
and it's like it really is. It's like it's not saying that the hare couldn't beat the tortoise, because the hare can beat the tortoise to the end of the line, but he decides to have a sleep. So he decides to get lazy and so forth, and that's the same thing as then when we decide to call, okay, we want to be the hare, so we're gonna increase that running volume. We're going to train every day, as like what was said before, and everything. And then the body just breaks down, so it has to stop and sleep, basically. So then that tortoise essentially goes past, and that's your compounding interest, your everything. And when we talk about me getting down to say 92 kilos, it's because you need to have create the habits of a 92 kilo person. So you can throw. So I could throw, say for instance, you needed 10 habits to be 92 kilos. I could do all 10 at the start, but I'm not going to last doing all 10. Whereas if I start off with that one, increasing, just like I've been doing my cold showers again, bringing them back, just been adding 10 seconds every time I'm in the shower. So I'm now building my way up, and it's not about being 5 minutes under the water. It's just about increasing every single day, doing my thing. And it's, as you say, people don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
But because everything is so instant nowadays, it's such a night. That's why in a way you can't. I can't say you can't, because you can take steroids and stuff, but so you still have to put in the work. You can't cheat body composition in a way. You have to put in the work to get there. Obviously, you can have surgery and so forth, but realistically, for most people, that's why if you're successful and then you've neglected your health, you normally can see that as a clear thing. You might have all the money, but your body looks like absolute shit because you've not looked after it. So it's that same principle. Was if you do something little every single day, like you said with your mum, increasing those squats, just are you doing something to get better? So that's the programming in essentially for aesthetics, looking at it in a slightly different respect and saying, what can I add in this block? What can I add in this block? And breaking it down. So I think that's kind of like summing it up quite nicely. But as a couple of takeaways, learning what your sweet spot is, I think that's probably the key thing of all of this, because programming is all based around that sweet spot and how hard you want to push and how hard you don't want to push, basically.
Yeah, exactly. The risk appetite. Like if you're a competitive athlete, you've got, like, if you are going to be competitive, you've got to accept a higher level of risk because you're sailing closer to the wind, or you're Icarus flying closer to the sun.
Here we go. Another mythology. I like it.
But the key principles are you've got to be doing enough to get results, but not too much, and constantly reevaluating where you are within the sweet spot, contrasting it with your progress is a huge part of programming. Yeah,
and so I guess, if you don't know what your sweet spot is, and if you have data of your training, start noting down like how you feel after these sessions, or how you feel when you wake up, because that's how you're going to start to understand these things. Or if you start to feel a bit of a niggle, like with your mate's knee, and all these little things, that if you start to feel a change, and not necessarily a positive change, they're the notes you need to make, or even a positive change, for instance. But if you start to feel things that are out of the normal, that's what you can then look at and look back at your data. But if you're not tracking anything, you're just hoping, and you can only get so far with hope.
Yeah, exactly. Like the training diary is something that stood the test of time for a good reason, because you can look back on it and actually understand what's going on. Like day to day, so much changes that, like you say, you're just guessing. And that reconciliation between your results and what you've been doing is the fundamental principle of a training program.
Yeah, it can be positive and it can be negative. But when you see like Facebook and Insta, when they come up with your time hops, like this time last year you was lifting that weight, especially if you post a lot on social media, and like when I did, and I was just like, fuck, like that's where I was. And you go, am I better than that now? Okay, my focus was different. I have a different focus now. That's what I put it down to. But exactly. No, it's important. It really is having a form of metric to play around with, so that you can understand that you can keep progressing. And that's what we're looking at here. We're looking to just constantly try and push our boundaries and get better day after day.
Exactly.
But really hope you did enjoy today's episode and you got some more to take away from it. We've got some more on programming principles next week, so do stay tuned for that. As always, if you did enjoy the episode, please share it, like, and all that stuff, all the usual bits. You can find us on YouTube, obviously on all your podcasting platforms since you're listening to us here. And if you can leave us a review on Apple, I'd really appreciate it. And so would Ash, I think. So until next time, thank you for your time, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.